Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This session is about teaching reading in Pakistan. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand the condition and status of teaching reading of English in Pakistani context. Well, my dear students, when it comes to the significance of reading in a second or foreign language, it cannot be denied. In a second language or in a foreign language classroom where the processes of teaching and learning take place, teaching of reading is a very, very significant or important element. When it comes to the teaching of reading of English, and when it comes to the teaching of reading of English in Pakistan, this becomes a very, very tricky question. This becomes a very, very tricky area. To understand why it is so problematic and why it is so tricky and what are the issues related to that, we need to understand the Pakistani situation, we need to understand the social context of Pakistan, and also we need to understand the status of English language in Pakistan if we want to understand the status of reading in English in Pakistani context. Well, with all the colonial history, with all the social prestige attached to English language, with all the teaching methodology that has been carried forward from the subcontinent, with all the constraints in the practical classroom, such as lack of resources and overcrowded classes, etc. When we look at the teaching of reading in English language in Pakistan, this becomes very, very crucial. In a typical Pakistani school, when we consider the school system in Pakistan, teaching of reading per se does not take place. Teaching reading in English in our context is restricted to reading some text from a textbook where the purpose is not to improve reading skill, rather the purpose is to prepare the students to memorize and thus to, if you let me say, to just vomit it out on the examination answer sheet and thus to pass the examination. Since in a typical Pakistani public sector, especially the rural area classroom, use of grammar translation method is still prevalent. Reading lessons in these classrooms, again, they focus on grammar translation method. And what typically happens in such a class is that either a student reads aloud or the teacher reads loud from some text from the textbook, and it is translated in L1 by the teacher to help the students understand what does it mean. This is the maximum reading that happens, that is loud reading. As far as silent reading is concerned, which is one of the major types of reading and which actually covers the major portion of reading of a learner's reading activities during the process of learning a language, silent reading, I would say, does not, if you let me say, I would say does not at all exist in typical Pakistani language classrooms. So when we look at the practices and when we look at the problems, the teachers are fixed, they are rigid in the sense that they were taught with the help of grammar translation method, they were taught to read this way, so they do that. There is, of course, lack of teacher training. Over the recent decades, the government has made, Higher Education Commission also has made a lot of efforts to improve on that. But unfortunately, those who even get some training, they find it an easy way out to follow the real practices that are being carried out around them. Reading comprehension, which is one of the major purposes of teaching reading skills in any language, this is found to be very much absent, and students are not taught to read to comprehend, or they are not taught to read to infer. Also, intensive reading, to find the meanings themselves, to find the hidden message themselves in the text. This is what Pakistani students in a typical Pakistani English language classroom are not taught or not prepared for. And this is also, I would say, not expected from these students as well, because at the end of the day, ground reality is that through the whole examination system, throughout the years, reading skill is not tested at any stage. Since it is not tested, teachers and learners both think it is not important to learn this significant language skill.